It is time for us to talk about our main event of the evening. We are going to the featherweight division, and it's our first title defense in this division since UFC 251. Alex Volkanovski is taking on Brian Ortega. We've had 13, 14 weeks of the Ultimate Fighter building up to this fight card, and I think Alex Volkanovski finds himself in a very interesting position because if you look at who the guy has beaten in his rise up the rankings, Chad Mendes, Max Holloway twice, Jose Aldo, he has beaten a who's who of some of the best featherweights the UFC have ever had. And yet we come into this fight with a lot of fans not giving him the appreciation he maybe deserves.
Yeah, he is definitely underrated by fans. Some people somehow think that Max Holloway won that last fight. I mean, Volkanovski won rounds 3, 4, and 5. I don't know how else to tell you, sadly. Even rounds 1 and 2, Volkanovski was kind of controlling them before Holloway landed those late knockdowns. So, in my opinion, I saw Volkanovski controlling like 80% of that fight, where he looked like he was in control and winning the fight. And, it's a fact that he did win 7 or 8 out of 10 rounds against Max Holloway, who, as we know, is one of the best fighters in the sport, who I believe is one of the best MMA fighters of all time. And for Volkanovski to soundly beat Max Holloway like that 2 times, that's as impressive as a win gets in mixed martial arts. So he's definitely underrated coming into this fight because of that last decision. And even the betting odds kind of reflect that. Volkanovski around a 60% favorite. The last time this fight was supposed to happen, I recall seeing Volkanovski around minus 175, which is a little bit closer to 63 or 64%. So the fact that this fight's been postponed, a few months, who got COVID? Was it Volkanovski who got COVID
I think it was one of Volkanovski's coaching team.
Yeah. So it seems like the odds have changed like a good 3% in this fight over the past few months, which might seem insignificant, but in terms of a big betting market like a UFC main event, it is pretty significant. So, I don't think the past few months has changed anything in favor of Ortega, so I'm not sure why the odds are changing. But what are your opinion on the odds here? Volkanovski around 60%, Karl.
That's the way I would go with it. The community tab, where we've asked people to predict who they think is going to win each fight, they've got it around sort of 70-30, so they're much more favourable of Volkanovski compared to Brian Ortega. I'm guessing that was a bike there?
Yeah. It seems like we got a few motorcycle people in our neighborhoods, right?
Ask them if they're Volkanovski fans.
Yeah, they're actually a part of a outlaw biker club, so I don't know if I'll be too friendly with them. But I did not just incriminate them, so.
I think one of the things that maybe has been a factor in changing these odds is we saw what happened with Brian Ortega last time out against Korean Zombie. There was a lot of people who wrote him off going into that fight. He hasn't fought for 2 years. He's fighting a guy who's in a great run of form in TKZ. I think most people on the community tab had Zombie, I think about 70-30 to win that one. And Brian Ortega just came into that fight completely transformed. His level of striking, I mean, Ortega was never a bad striker. I think that's sort of a narrative that a lot of people have painted, that he was just absolutely dominated by Max Holloway and, oh my god, how awful he is. Go back and watch 231. Yes, he got pieced up in that 4th round, but for the first 3 rounds, he was holding his own against Max Holloway. It's just Max's conditioning and output is so good, it eventually wears people down. But what he did do was he refined his strike. He became less of a brawler and more of a technician. And I think a lot of people maybe thought that if he's been able to do that in 2 years, add another year to that, how good could he possibly be when he fights Volkanovski?
Yeah, great point. You brought up the thing that I think could have maybe influenced this line is that Chan Sung Jung fought Ige. He looked pretty good, got a win, and now that win Ortega has over him has actually aged a little bit better. So maybe that's what's influencing the line a little bit here. But yeah, Ortega's not a bad striker at all. I mean, I think he did struggle early on in his career. He kind of was the nail for a first few of his fights where he would get beat up for the first few rounds and then come back strong in round three. That happened to him several fights in a row. The Guida fight, the Moicano fight, both those were big comeback round three finishes for him. And then he had those two fights where he was losing, did come back. And then he had two pretty clean finish performances over Swanson, over Edgar. Then he obviously got destroyed by Max Holloway, and then had a great bounce back win over Chan Sung Jung. I don't really agree with Ortega getting the title shot off of one win, but the UFC featherweight division is kind of in a weird place right now where there's no clear number one contender. It seemed like the UFC didn't want to do Volkanovski Holloway again, so I sort of understand why they're doing this. And Ortega does have a window to win, I would say. I can't see Ortega winning 3 out of 5 rounds to win a decision here. I do see Ortega needing the finish, but that's a role he's comfortable playing. He is a good finisher. He can hurt you with strikes in the feet, and he also can submit you with all types of submissions on the ground. He is a tremendous grappler, but he is not really a great wrestler. He's not known for getting the fight to the floor, having great top position and then finding a submission. He's kind of known for finding submissions in transition, in chaotic scrambles, snatching onto a submission, a guillotine. He's not really the type of guy to wrestle you and to slowly, methodically get that submission. So I don't see Ortega being able to wrestle. I don't see him being able to win 3 out of 5 rounds. So he's probably going to have to land a big strike on the feet, hurt Volkanovski, and then turn that into a finish, whether it be with a bunch of strikes and a flurry or snatching onto a submission and getting Volk in a submission. So I see Ortega needing to win inside the distance. And if the fight goes the full 5 rounds, I see the more adaptable fighter in Volkanovski, being able to, decipher that information, to make reads, to make adjustments, and to win the fight as it goes on. So if it goes 5 rounds, I really favor Volkanovski to win the decision.
I'm in the same boat, and I am picking Volkanovski to win this one by decision. But I'm in a very similar boat to you. Brian Ortega is what I would call a sleeper. I think there is a lot of traits that he has that could cause Volkanovski problems. Like, Volkanovski isn't going to want to wrestle the guy, because if you try taking him down, you're entering Brian's world. He loves jiu-jitsu, and I could very easily see him getting a submission off his back. So Volkanovski's not going to go down that path. So it's going to be purely a kickboxing match. And we have seen in the past that there have been people there who have caused Volkanovski problems. Chad Mendes dropped him. Max Holloway dropped him twice. Does Brian Ortega have that level of striking to do that to him? I'm not 100% sure, but he is a much better striker than people give him credit for. So on paper, there are a lot of elements to Brian Ortega that could cause Volkanovski issues. I've seen CKB do wonders with game planning though. Like CKB identified, hey, Max Holloway doesn't like these leg kicks, and they hammered that home in that first fight, and he got the win. And we've seen that before with Adesanya and game planning for other fighters as well. This is a very good training camp. They'll have obviously found something in Brian Ortega that makes them think we can easily get that done. So I am picking Volkanovski by decision. I think they're gonna out game plan Ortega.
One thing I'll say about the wrestling, I do think that Volkanovski could take Ortega down, and he might here. I don't think that. I think that Alexander Volkanovski is good enough to avoid some sort of guard submission or some sort of guillotine. I think he's a good enough of a wrestler, smart enough of a fighter that he can get this fight into the clinch and hit a takedown and stay in top position safely if he wants to. And Volkanovski is really underrated because he's so good at fighting in so many different ranges. I mean, the guy can fight so well at distance. As you said, outstruck Max Holloway, picked him apart with those leg kicks, has tremendous boxing. He's also great at getting the fight in the clinch, holding you against the cage, landing clinch strikes like he did versus Jose Aldo. And he also can wrestle you, take you down, land good ground and pound like he did to Darren Elkins, Jeremy Kennedy, Shane Young, several guys that he's out-wrestled in the UFC. Not really, the level of fighter as Ortega, but Volkanovski is really excellent at every range of MMA, and that's why he's going to be so difficult to win. But looking at a bet for this fight, if you like Ortega here, as I mentioned, I do think he needs a finish to win. And as I mentioned, the later the fight goes, I think the more it favors Volkanovski. So if you like Ortega here, Ortega in rounds 1, 2, or 3 is plus 440. I think that's probably better than his inside the distance line. I think that if Ortega is winning the fight, it is going to be by finish in the first 3 rounds, likely by landing a big punch, a big elbow on Volkanovski and translating that into a finish. But I don't see it happening. I see Volkanovski diffusing Ortega, in very intelligent fashion, picking him apart at all different ranges, and eventually winning the fight by a pretty dominant decision. I'm not expecting it to be an extremely exciting fight, so I will pick Volkanovski 49-46 decision.
What result do you think the UFC would want more? Because all roads seem to indicate that Max Holloway, if he gets through Yair Rodriguez, is going to be fighting for the belt next. Do you think the UFC would want him versus Volkanovski 3 to put a line in the sand and say, hey, this guy is the best between the two? Or the arguably fresh air Max Holloway versus renewed striking ace Brian Ortega?
UFC definitely wants Ortega to win 100,000%. That's why they gave him the title shot off of one win. After the last fight, the Holloway and Volkanovski fight, during the embedded, you see a conversation between Dana and Matt Serra saying that they thought that Max won all 5 rounds. So I mean, they definitely have a preference for Max Holloway over there. And they would much rather see Ortega win, get Volkanovski out of the picture a little bit, and then have be kind of an easy matchup to get Holloway the belt back, because Holloway is definitely the most popular UFC featherweight, and I think that the UFC wants the belt in his hands, and the UFC certainly does not like Alexander Volkanovski.